This is a story from Maria. This is really good. She writes, in February of 2012, I traveled from my home in Texas to visit my sister, who lived with my nephew at the time in Seattle, Washington. After they took me around Seattle to the fine dining establishments and for a boat ride at Puget Sound, I told my nephew I wanted to buy some Bigfoot stuff. Bigfoot? Why? He asked. Because Washington State is the Bigfoot capital of the world with the most sightings, I told him. I explained that I had been interested in Bigfoot for years and that I watched countless YouTube videos and TV documentaries on the topic. I jokingly said that I'd like to go Bigfoot hunting. Well, he was not amused. Seeing his reaction, I asked him if he believed in Bigfoot. Well, I don't know, he said. And then after thinking for a minute, he told me what happened to him and his wife when they first got married. In 2001, my nephew's wedding was held at the Navajo Nation Reservation in New Mexico. His wife, a Navajo, grew up near the I kind of hate to pronounce this word. Natchiti Mountains. Naschitti. The Not Shitty Mountains. How about that? Our entire family from Texas, so we all, around 30 of us, drove up the day before the wedding to the reservation where the wedding ceremony and festivities were to be held. It was a large open field of 100 square yards surrounded by trees. His wife's Navajo grandmother lived in a log cabin in the same area, just outside the trees. There were no hotels in that area, so we took tents and camping gear. The following evening, when the wedding festivities had ended, we sat around the campfire and enjoyed the stars. Afterward, we all turned in. The next morning, our family drove back home to Texas. My nephew and his wife planned to camp out one more night so they could spend a little more time with their family before leaving on their honeymoon. But that evening, my nephew and his wife were sitting around the campfire when far away they heard strange, loud, deep growls. They said nothing to each other, and they continued talking. They heard the growls 2 more times, each time a little closer and louder than before. It grew quiet for a while, and they got easier. They finally decided to turn in for the night, and my nephew got up to put away some of their gear. As he was putting out the fire, they heard another growl. This time it was close, and it was really loud. He asked his wife what animal was growling, and she said she didn't know. She'd never heard anything like it before. Well, they both looked around to see what it was, but it was pitch dark beyond a few yards. They continued to put things away, and as they were doing so, the growling came closer still and even louder. Now my nephew, who was normally a calm and level-headed person, was beginning to panic. "Let's get the heck out of here," he said to his wife. They began throwing things into the bed of his truck with no regard for damaging any of it, and the growling was now within 30 yards and beginning to sound angrier. When it got to within a few feet of them, he yelled at his wife, "Get in the truck!" They jumped in and sped out of the mountains as fast as they could. They drove over an hour away to Gallup, New Mexico, where they got a hotel for the night. The next morning, they drove back to their campsite to get their tent and whatever gear they'd left behind. Then they said goodbye to her family and they left. When he finished his story, I asked his wife what she thought it was, and reluctantly she said she didn't know. But months later, I had the opportunity to speak with my nephew about it again. I asked him if he thought what they heard was a Bigfoot. He said he didn't know, but he never wanted to hear that sound again. Woo! Could it have been a skinwalker? It's a Navajo reservation. I think the skinwalkers are Navajo. I don't really know much about that. I just know the skinwalker is a interesting, creepy kind of creature that is from Indian folklore. Could be real. I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but Neoma, who edited this, said she's wondering if it was either a dogman or a skinwalker. But it could have been a Bigfoot. Either way, it was a really good story, and I really appreciate Maria sending it. Thank you, ma'am. Hey, y'all, welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that first story. I've got one more viewer encounter. And then we have 2 Steve Lilly encounters. People have sent me stories where they've actually run into Steve Lilly. Now, if you're new to the channel, you don't know who Steve Lilly and his crew is, they're a group of Bigfoot hunters that I know, and I write about them. Steve Lilly actually has his own channel, and on the end screen, if you like these last 2 stories, if you think they're interesting, click on the end screen video. It'll be episode number 1 of the Steve Lilly Journals. And if you click on it, subscribe. There's 15 episodes. There's probably 8 to 10 hours of Steve Lilly stories up on that channel. And they're a lot of fun, and they're good, and I love writing them, and I hope you enjoy this. So we got 2 stories, one more after this, and 2 Steve Lilly encounters. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for joining me. All right, here we go. This is a story from JB. He claims this is true, and here's what he writes. Before I tell you my story, I need to fill you in on my background. I grew up in a 6,000-acre farm in North Georgia. I'm a descendant of First Nation grandparents. I was taught to hunt and fish at a young age, and my brothers and I were making fish and turtle baskets before the age of 3. At the time, there were not any deer in North Georgia. In 1965, the Department of Natural Resources started stocking them by the truckload from Texas. We also had large cats that we call black panthers roaming the wilderness, and when they would scream, it sounded like a woman being murdered. I had never heard of a Bigfoot until sometime in the late 1980s, and I always thought it was an animal that lived in the northwestern United States. My story begins in the fall of 2019, when I started hearing rocks hitting my house. There were loud noises outside my window in the middle of the night. Now, I was not a Bigfoot expert by any means, but something told me this was classic Bigfoot behavior, and I decided to educate myself. I scrolled through the various cryptid websites, and I did my due diligence as if studying for an exam. And what I learned is that you don't find Bigfoot, Bigfoot finds you. One of the cryptid research sites recommended keeping a journal of events, and this is what I have recorded. January 7, 3:15 a.m., something hit the side of the house. February 1st, 3:58 a.m., noises like a Louisville Slugger smacking a baseball. February 19, 3:28 a.m., vocal whooping sounds outside. February 21, 3:30 a.m., rapid tapping on the wall like the drumming of hands. After I recorded the last entry in my journal, I went to bed. At sunrise, I decided to take a look around the outside of my house. It had rained that night, and above the window, about 8 feet up the wall, I spotted muddy handprints. There was a 13-inch footprint on the ground directly below that. It was quiet for the next 2 weeks. I would notice a bad odor every day, like rotting garbage. And my dogs would growl, but they never tried to leave the yard. Now, this is unusual because they're half lab and half pit bull. They kill everything that sneaks into our place, and they're very good with the chickens, and they protect my flock of yard birds like sheepdogs. I picked up my journal at the next sign of Bigfoot activity. March 17, 3:30 a.m. More sounds like wood striking wood. March 18, 4 a.m. Same as the night before. March 26, 9:06 p.m. Sitting at my computer and hearing a loud, long scream. The coyotes are now howling. Get, shoo, shoo. Sorry, y'all, a chicken walked in my office. Where was I? The coyotes are now howling. April 6, 6:28 a.m. A tree branch snapping, this time within 200 feet of my house. April 7, 4:30 a.m. Something bipedal kicking the ground outside my window. With all of this going on, I wasn't sleeping like I should. And one night, my lack of rest caught up with me and I passed out in my chair. I had the most vivid dream where I was visited by a being named Kia. Kei. Kai. Maybe that's how you say that name. It was like being approached by a stray dog, but instead of it attacking out of fear, it offered submission. Kai assured me that it meant no harm and could read not only my mind, but my heart. It was the most pleasant dream I'd had in years, and I woke up from it smiling. I'm sure it was a message, though I've yet to come face to face with a Bigfoot. A few rocks thrown at the house and a muddy handprint isn't really grounds to go to war against a creature that I think only wants to communicate on some basic level. I believe they're everywhere and not just in the wilderness. And that's the end of it. And that, her keeping a journal, that's a good idea. If people are having some kind of activity around their house, that's kind of interesting. You can keep a record of it because there may be a long period between activity and you won't remember what you heard. So journaling this stuff is good. I don't know where Bigfoot lives. I would say mainly in the woods, but they could live in some urban areas. Speaking of dogs keeping chickens away, and about as of last weekend, we had about 28, almost 30 chickens, we think. This past Tuesday, and you guys like the videos of my chickens. Last Tuesday, I was out on a job site. My wife had gone to another town and was having lunch with some friends. And we came back and about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she came back about 4. Anyway, long story short, I went to lock the chickens up and it's like only half of them were here. And we got to searching around. We found one dead chicken way back in some fields behind us. I just got in an ATV and rode around and I found it. And then we started counting chickens, and we had lost 12 chickens. So we're down 12 chickens and we can't find them anywhere. We think something came through and killed them, and the only conclusion I can make is that it was maybe one dog, probably a pack of dogs. We have wild dogs running around here. Our dogs were in the house or they would have run them off. So it's been kind of a sad week for us, and they were our youngest birds. We lost 5 or 6 young, less than a year old Orpingtons, and they're the biggest, prettiest, fluffiest, waddly chickens you've ever seen. They're really sweet. We lost all of those except one hen and one rooster. And then we had 6 Jersey Giants. These were big black, beautiful hens, just jet black. And they were so pretty and healthy looking. And one of those wandered back up the next day. I don't know. It's the weirdest thing in the world. We've lost 1 or 2 at a time to a fox or a raccoon. Matter of fact, I saw a fox come in and grab a couple of our chickens about 4 winters ago. Anyway, we're down to half our chickens, but we do have 12 more that we're raising, and so we'll replace those. But no, I don't think it was Bigfoot that took our chickens in the middle of the day. But it's, anyway, I just thought I'd let y'all know that we're down. Something took almost half of all our chickens. It's a sad week for us, and we love these birds. We don't have a huge affection for them, but we love them being around and being free and free ranging around our place. And that's kind of the price you pay for letting your chickens run around and, unguarded, the dog's in the house. There's nothing the dogs can do to help them. So all that to say, it's kind of sad. I didn't mean to bum you out. How about we move to a couple of Steve Lilly encounters? I think you guys are going to like these. Okay, we have a Steve Lilly sighting. Actually, I've got 2 Steve Lilly sightings in this podcast. Here's the first one. It was the last season of the Alabama deer season when I had the craziest experience of my life. I had already had a good season, taking down a fat 7-point that I had been wanting to cull for 2 seasons, and another which was one of the best bucks I had ever harvested. He was a good 9-point with a 21-inch spread. I already had him at the taxidermist with the perfect spot for him picked out in my den. However, this big boy had set me back $750 between the processor and the taxidermist. I still had 1 buck left on my license before I was tagged out, but I was scared to death that I would actually see another big one. My wallet was feeling mighty thin about this time. The call of the hunt was too strong to resist, though, and I decided to pick up my bow, and if another wall hanger came in range, then it was just meant to be. I traveled to a new area on a piece of property that I had leased for the first time this season. According to the woman who owned the land, no one had hunted it in years. She needed the extra money and she liked having me around to keep an eye on things. I had only hunted a small portion of the lease. This was the perfect opportunity to learn more about the place and still scratch the urge to be in the stand. During bow season, I had hunted the area enough to pattern the deer. I had passed on several bucks without a shooter ever coming into range. I figured out that there was a funnel point where the deer were coming out of the thick stand of timber. There was a creek that wandered around the base of the ridge, and that was the only easy place to cross, and the area was covered in deer tracks. I decided to save the area in case my season didn't go well. But now I had one last chance, and that's where I headed. I was in my stand before daylight. I figured I'd catch them transitioning to the bedding area or maybe see a buck chasing a doe. It was a still, cool morning with a good deal of frost on the ground. I heard something moving quickly through the woods on the ridge above me. It sounded large, but I couldn't see anything through the thick timber above me. And soon I heard more of the same, like there were more than one. Well, I thought the cows had gotten loose and were wandering the woods near my stand. It wouldn't be my first time encountering that. But 20 minutes passed and the visibility was good now, and I started using my binoculars, and I was looking for signs of the cows on the ridge above me. A roar broke loose through the timber. It sounded like a cross between a lion and a diesel engine. Well, I jumped in my seat, and I was shocked, and I'm not ashamed to say that it scared me. And then gunfire broke out 100 yards above me. It sounded like a war zone up there. I know what an AR sounds like, and I have one of my own, but the M249 saw shocked me. I hadn't heard one of those since my time in the military. I didn't know what was going on up there, but I didn't want any part of it. I thought about climbing down and clearing the area. Then I thought better of that. My stand was so well hidden that my best chance of not being a part of that firestorm was to stay concealed. And then I heard an awful roar again, and something came running down the hill straight to me, breaking through the timber like a bulldozer. It broke into the open 40 yards away and stumbled to its knees. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a huge gorilla-looking creature, but it wasn't a gorilla. This thing had big yellow canine teeth that I could see easily at that distance. It was covered in hair and built like an elite bodybuilder, except way bigger. This thing was almost as tall as me on its knees, and it had to weigh 500 pounds. And I've never been more thankful to be up in a tree in all my life, and I noticed then that it was wheezing as blood poured out numerous bullet holes in its chest. The beast jumped up and started to run when the guy came running down the hill after this thing, yelling, "Where you going, big boy?" The beast took 2 long strides before a blast from the man's AR punched through the back of its head. The creature's massive body went limp, slumping forward before collapsing in a pile 20 yards from my tree. More gunfire erupted from atop the hill, and I heard someone call, "Coming at you, Steve." The man turned, firing at an even bigger one of those things. It ran straight down the ridge at him, taking 3 shots to the chest before the man's gun went empty, and I watched helplessly as he attempted to reload, but the beast got to him first. It struck him with great force, sending him sailing through the air. He landed next to the first creature on his back with a thud, and I heard him gasp when he hit the ground. It was the sound a man makes when the wind's been knocked out of him. Before the man could recover, the beast was standing over him. The man was helpless, and he knew it. And the beast yanked him up, screaming with rage in his face, and it looked like he was about to bite the man's head off. I don't remember thinking it through. My body was in motion before my mind could comprehend what I was doing. and the next thing I knew, I was in full draw, releasing an arrow. My muzzy trocar broadhead went straight into that thing's left ear with a whack. It must have hit the other side of the skull and stopped, because it didn't go through. Only half the arrow was visible when the thing dropped the man before taking 2 backward staggering steps, and then it collapsed. Another roar got my attention as a smaller one of those things came running straight for my tree. And even though it wasn't near the size of the first 2, it was tall and it was built just like the others. It must have seen me shoot the big one, and it was coming for blood. And it was so fast, and all I could do was react. And I dropped my bow as I drew my 9mm SIG from my belt. And it was halfway up the tree when I leaned over, emptying my mag into it. I know I heard it, but a 9mm didn't do enough damage. And I struggled to reload my backup mag just as the thing reached the bottom of my platform. It was reaching up for me when the AR barked again. A line of fire ripped through the thing's side, causing it to lose its grip on the tree and falling to the ground. And a crazy man walked up and put 3 more in the creature's head to finish it. This goofy son of a bitch looked up at me and just grinned, and he turned and yelled up the hill, "Lewis, is that all of them?" Just then, one of the biggest men I'd ever seen in my life came walking down to us. And I knew immediately where the sound of the M249 saw was coming from. "Yeah, that's all of them," the big man answered. "Hook is taking heads on the top of the hill." "Good deal," the man answered back before looking up at me. "You can come down now, we got 'em all." I climbed down as quickly as I could with my legs still shaking. And when I got down on the ground, the man handed me my bow. "You dropped this when you pulled your pistol," he said. "It looks okay to me, but you might want to check your sights. I sure am glad you were on with this thing." "I have 2 questions," I said, taking my bow. "Who are you, and what in the world are these things?" "Well, my name's Steve Lilly," he said, offering his hand. "Now, this is Lewis, and the guy on the hill over there, that's my buddy Hook. He'll be here in a minute." "Well, that's good to know. My name's Jeremy Biggs, but everyone around here calls me Bull." "Well, I appreciate you backing us up on that one, Bull. I thought it was the end for me. I'm glad you were here," said Steve. "Well, I really didn't think about it," I said. "I couldn't let that thing kill you and do nothing. What are these things?" "Well, I think you know what they are," Lewis said. "Bigfoot, Sasquatch, boogers, take your pick. Did you really Robin Hood this bastard?" "That's right," said Steve. "He's a goner, but old Bull saved my ass." "If you hadn't killed the one trying to pull me out of my stand, I would have been a goner, so what do I do now?" I asked. I was still confused by the whole event. "Well, you don't have to do nothing," Steve said with a shrug. "Just go on like you always have. I might suggest you carry something bigger than your 9mm. And you can tell this story if you want, but everybody call you crazy, but that's up to you." "Are there any more of those things around here?" I asked, dreading the answer. "We don't think so," a voice from behind me said. I turned around to see another large man appear. His arms were covered in tattoos, and a long ponytail hung out the back of his ball cap. He was heavily armed like the other 2 men. I assumed he was the one called Hook. "Looks like we got 'em all, but you should always be aware." "There were 9 in total," Steve explained. "Now these 3 are the last ones, and we need to do some butchering." "Butchering?" I asked. I was confused. Before anyone could answer, Lewis cut the head off the first one and dropped it in a sack. "We have to collect the heads or we don't get paid," Steve explained. "So you guys get paid to hunt these things?" I said. "Well, sorta. I can't tell you much about it. Hey, is there a good place to eat around here? How about we buy you breakfast?" "I don't think I could handle anything now. I feel a little sick to my stomach now that I've calmed down. But there is a Waffle House in town." And Steve turned to the other guys and wiggled his eyebrows. "I get it," said Steve. "Well, we appreciate your help." "It was the right thing to do, and that's enough for me," I said. "I'm just glad you're okay." Lewis grabbed my arrow and tried to pull it out of the Bigfoot's head, and it wouldn't come out. The broadhead was embedded deep in the bone. He began rotating the shaft, and after a moment, it came unthreaded from the broadhead, and he pulled it free. "Here you go, Robin Hood," Lewis said, handing me my arrow with a big smile. "You sure you don't want to eat with us? I'd love to hear the story about how you saved Steve's ass." "Steve can tell you everything you need to know," I said. "I think I'm going to get out of these woods." And I gathered up my gear and I started off. Everyone laughed and wished me well as I walked out of the area. I went home and stood in the shower for an hour in a near state of shock. And once I was clean, I passed out on my bed for several hours. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was an adrenaline crash. I hadn't been that amped up in a long time. It was a week later, and I was checking my mailbox, and I noticed a manila envelope that had no postage on it. It was obvious that someone other than the mailman had stuffed it in my box. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I saw the cash inside. There was a letter from Steve inside as well. "Dear Bull, I hope you're doing all right. I wanted to thank you again for the help in the woods the other day. And I talked it over with the guys and we all agreed you deserve this. It's the bounty on your kill. And we think this is fair. Signed, Steve Lilly." I counted the cash, and I was surprised to say the least. I will not disclose the amount, but let's just say I'm not worried about my deer amount anymore. I don't know if I'll ever take Steve up on his offer, but I did take his advice. I now have the firepower I need to handle another creature, and if I ever have another run-in with Bigfoot, I'll be ready. Oh man, Steve Lilly popping up everywhere. He's in Alabama. Him and the crew, him, Lewis, and Hook are in Alabama, and he almost lost it on this hunt, according to Bull. Bull, thanks for the email, and thanks for letting us know you ran into Steve. I appreciate it. Here is another Steve Lilly encounter. This is pretty good. The man writes, "I wanted to write you about something that happened to me not long ago in the Mississippi Delta. A friend of mine and I were on a hog hunt there. And on the third day, we were already cleaning 4 big swamp boars. We had great success right away, but it wasn't because we were great hunters. There were just so many pigs in there that it made it easy. We were butchering the last pig for the day, and we heard something close, and we heard it breathing. Now, I know that sounds strange, but that's exactly what it sounded like. Both of us knew there was supposed to be nothing in these woods that sounded like that or sounded that big. So my friend and I both, we reached for our rifles. It crossed my mind that whatever this thing was, a rifle might not be enough because it sounded huge. But I was hoping it was a bear, but I was doubtful since we don't have many bears here. I said, "How about we leave this meat here and you start moving toward the gator?" My friend's eyes were big as golf balls, and he did exactly what I told him to do. The heavy breathing creature emerged from the trees, and we could see it as clear as day now. This thing looked hideous. It was huge, 8 or 10 feet tall, it's all muscled up and covered in nasty matted hair, and it had big old fangs hanging out of its mouth. It moved toward me a few steps, and then it broke into a flat-out run. But there was no way I was going to outrun this thing. I was about to become its next meal. Suddenly, I was young again, back in the jungles of Nicaragua when I was in the military. And after yelling to my buddy to keep running, I lifted my rifle and I squared up on this monster, and I started to squeeze the trigger. It seemed hopeless to me, but I wasn't going down without a fight. 3 booming reports came from behind me just as my rifle exploded into my shoulder. It stopped the creature's advance and actually flipped it on its back, deader than a doornail. Never taking my rifle off this thing, I yelled back to my friend, "Damn, that was a good shot!" But he never answered. The creature had not moved a muscle for a few seconds. I didn't see him coming back to life, so I turned my head to see where my friend was. Instead, 3 men walked from the trees into the clearing, 2 white guys and a black guy. The shortest of the 3 walked over to me. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Who are you?" He walked closer and he shook my hand. "Steve, Lilly, I hope we didn't scare you. Looked like you had this under control, but with these things, well, we didn't want to take a chance, so we went ahead and took the shot. We've been tracking this thing all morning." Well, I was grateful and quite confused. "Thank you," is all I could think to say. I think the adrenaline was catching up to me and I began to start shaking. The dark-skinned man walked to me and placed his hand on top of my rifle to push it down. I still had it trained on that dead animal. "It's dead," he said. "It's kind of unusual, maybe a little stupid that you stood your ground and were taking that squatch on by yourself. We don't see that much." "Well, I had to give my buddy a head start," I said. "Well, you did good," the man said, with his enormous hand on my shoulder, rocking me back and forth. "If you would have run, it would have caught you. You did what you needed to do." The man named Steve walked back over after inspecting the monster. "You look like you could use a drink." He pulled a flask from a cargo pocket and he handed it to me. I must have drank half of it before handing it back to him. Steve and I talked for a while, and the other two packed all my meat that we had butchered from those hogs in cloth sacks. And when they finished, they carried the meat over to me. "Where's the man that was with you?" a man with a ponytail said. "Well, he's down this trail with our vehicle." "Well, come on, we'll haul this meat over there for you. You don't need to hang around, we'll take care of this." I stood there still in some level of shock, but I had enough wits about me to turn my head for the gator. When we got there, my buddy sat in the front seat. That boy was white as a ghost. "I thought you were dead for sure. What the hell was that thing?" he said. "And who are you guys?" All of us lifted the cargo into the bed of the UTV. "I'll explain it when we get in the truck," I said. He couldn't stop asking questions. "Is that thing dead?" He was worried about running into it again on the way to the truck. I knew why he asked. "It's dead," said Steve. "Your buddy here made the kill shot. You got a good friend right here. You boys head on out. We'll clean up this mess." "Are there more of those things out there?" said my friend. There could be," was all Steve said. The three men walked back up the trail toward the beast. My buddy kept asking questions. Instead of heading for the truck, I drove on up the trail so we could get a good look at this dead creature. And about the time it came into view, one of those guys was raising a machete, and he was hacking this thing's head off. He held it up to the others, and then he dropped it in one of those cloth sacks they carried in their packs. I was going to ask him what the hell they were doing, but I had had enough of this monster shit for a day. After making a sweeping loop around the clearing, we headed away and toward my truck in normalcy. "We need to spend more time in church," my friend said as we drove through the bottoms. His head was on a swivel, looking for more of those things. I was a little worried about it, too. We both still had a few days off, and even though that day scared us pretty bad, we didn't go home just yet. But we gave up on pig hunting, and we went crappie fishing for the next few days. I'm done with pig hunting. And to this day, I don't know who those men were who appeared at the right time to get us out of that jam, but I sure am glad they did. Oh, Steve Lilly and them showing up everywhere and helping people out. And they always seem to show up in the nick of time. Very good story, sir. I'm glad you reported this Steve Lilly sighting. Thank you. Appreciate you listening to this video. There should be a Steve Lilly video showing on your screen right now. Just click it, go straight to that channel. Hit the subscribe button, hit a thumbs up, leave a comment. You know the drill. Us YouTube creators, we love that. But I think if you like good action stories with a little bit of comedy and a little bit of mystery and intrigue, I think you'll like the Steve Lilly series. Got 15 of them up. Appreciate you guys joining me on this video, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.